Okay, are we ready to go? Slides. Okay, just need my slides. Okay, welcome to OARC 39. It feels like no time at all since our last workshop in Philadelphia, but it's actually 4 years since we last had a workshop in Europe jointly with Centre and co-located with the Right meeting. So it's great to be back, and it's great to see some of you I haven't seen for a while. My name is Keith Mitchell. For those of you who don't know me, I'm OARC President. Before we actually get down to the real content of the workshop, I just want to run you through a few bits of workshop information and also a very quick overview of what we've been doing at OARC lately. So this is a hybrid event. It's our third one this year. We have a conduct policy. The conduct policy applies online as well as in person. And we basically just want to make sure that everybody has a good experience. So you committed to this conduct policy either when you signed up as an OARC member or when you registered for the workshop. If anyone is feeling uncomfortable about any aspect of how your other workshop attendees are behaving, then please let us know. I mean, usually everyone at OARC workshops is behaved really well. So the workshop is being recorded. We're just in the process of putting the OARC 38 videos on the YouTube channel, and the 39 ones will be a few weeks after the event. We're using webinar format, so if you're coming in online, you are basically muted, and there is no audio from remote participants. Event time zone, we're in Central European summertime, so that's UTC +2. You can adjust your time zone on the Indico site if you want to keep track of exactly when things are. And we'll be doing the some commentary in the workshop in the usual social media locations. These are the hashtags. The network connectivity is very generously provided by OARC supporter SOCS. So I appreciate their time and for the work that they did last night and then the run up to the workshop, providing us with Wi-Fi and connectivity. So it's the usual OARC SSID and password. You've probably figured out that the breaks are happening in the foyer outside the meeting. Lunch, which you already had today and will be again on Sunday, is in the hotel restaurant, which you had to negotiate in order to get here in the first place. And the toilets, the restrooms are just back on the left there. If you have any issues about the food, then please ask Dinesh or the hotel catering staff. In the event that there's a fire alarm, the way out is basically to go back the way you came. When you get to the elevator lobby, there is a door on the right there with a number 2 on the front. If you follow that downstairs, there's another door which leads out to the street level where the assembly point is. We're not quite done with this COVID-19 thing yet. Everyone here has demonstrated that they've had at least 2 vaccination shots. There are plenty of free masks and tests available at the registration desk. Please use them. If you're not comfortable with these measures, or indeed if you're feeling unwell, then please attend online. And again, please speak to Dinesh if you have any health issues or concerns or symptoms. Since the pandemic universe, Mattermost chat is pretty much mandatory for participating in OARC workshops. If you're not already signed up to it, you're going to miss out. We'll be using it for questions and answers, wherever a remote participant is involved, rating the talks. Remote speakers will be using it for timekeeping, and also for general meeting discussion. If you haven't signed up, you can sign up at chat.dns-OARC.net, and there's clients for pretty much everything, or you can just use your browser. Questions. All the speaking slots include 5 to 10 minutes Q&A. We'll do that on a first come, first served, time permitting basis. If we run out of time, then obviously the speakers are around in person or in the chat room afterwards. Because we're webcasting and because we're remote participants, please identify yourself and your affiliation when you're asking a question. We're also going to do the Q&A slightly differently this time to try and make it a little bit easier than some of the challenges we had last time. With one exception, we have grouped all the remote speakers into a single remote session, and that session will have a remote session chair. So for in-person questions, it's pretty straightforward. If you're in the room, it's an in-person speaker, please stand up at the microphone line, wait for the session chair to ask you to speak, then you can go ahead. For remote questions, if you're a remote attendee and you want to ask a question of any speaker, or if you are in the room or a remote attendee and it's a remote speaker, then please use Mattermost chat to ask the question. In the workshops channel, prepend your question with hash questions, and the session chair will read that question out in turn. The other thing we'll be using the Mattermost workshops channel for is for doing polls. Again, we've done this quite a few times. You'll get a simple choice to rate the talk. That will be open basically for the duration of the talk and for the Q&A period afterwards. The data from that is really helpful to the program committee because it makes sure that their scoring process for the abstract submissions is compatible with what you're appreciating. There's also a general survey for event feedback for things like logistics and food and timing and all of these things. So again, we appreciate your feedback there. We're going to do lightning talks as a late breaking option for the first time in a very long time. There's a start 25-minute slot for these at the end of Sunday. We can allow 5 to 10 minutes per talk. It's for in-person speakers only, and we have reopened the abstracts. So if you've got something, you're inspired by something you see, or you want to maybe challenge something you see, or you've got something new that's come up since the submission deadline closed, this is your opportunity to share it with the community. So you can use the abstracts. The deadline for that is the start of the lunch break tomorrow. The PC will review the submissions over lunch and then let you know in the afternoon before the final session. We also have a hybrid team here. There are 4 human team members from the staff. You probably met Dinesh, Jerry at the registration desk. There's me, there's Mike, who's doing a lot of work on the webcast stuff. There's our furry friend here. More than half the PC are here, half the board are here, but you will also find the other half of the staff and the PC and the board online, again in Mattermost, if you want to contact us or speak to us about anything. So we're doing 2 social events. We have not hybridized the social event. There are 2 separate social events. We're using spatial chat again for the online social event. That will start immediately after the proceedings today and will proceed for about a couple of hours. You will get an access link to that via email. And then as soon as that's finished, the in-person social event here in Belgrade starts. This will be at the Red Queen restaurant, which is down on the river waterfront, about 4 kilometers from here. Badges are required. Some of you added +1s so that the restaurant staff know who we are. If you could pick up before you leave this afternoon a spare lanyard for your +1, they don't need to wear a badge, but if they can wear a lanyard, then that will help with that. The event is from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock. We've arranged a bus. There is 1 bus there, there is 1 bus back. Don't miss the bus. The bus will go from the front of the hotel at 6:30, and boarding will start 10 minutes before that. And then the bus will return at 10 p.m. So that is all the meeting logistics stuff. I'd just like to give you a very brief update on OARC business. A lot of the OARC members will already be familiar with this because it's only a couple of weeks since the AGM, so I'll try and keep it brief and just give you a brief overview. Why is OARC here? We're here to make the DNS work better. We do that by working with operators, with researchers, building a bridge between them, providing tools that are useful for that. And it's about our community and building the relationships within that community so that we all work together. Workshops are a key part of that, but they're by no means the only thing that we do. We have a very diverse member community. You will see there's some very large corporations in there. There are some very small organizations as well. We have academic organizations, we have non-profits, we have many country code CCTLDs, which is why it's great to work with Centre. If you're not already a member, then please consider it. So what we managed so far this year, as I said, we've migrated our workshops. This is our 3rd one. Our annual Day in the Life of the Internet 2022 data collection is completed, and all of that data is now released, both in raw and cleaned format. We relocated our secondary site in Ottawa, Canada. got some new routers that we're going to upgrade both our sites with. Websites got upgraded. We've not just been running workshops in person, but we've also been able to attend various industry conferences, and it's a good way of interacting with the members and also making the community more aware of what we're doing. We finally got back to internal planning meetings, visited our main site in Fremont, California. We have 2 new team members. We had Mike Bear start earlier in the year, and a new admin person based with me in Indianapolis, Rebecca. And our Ceph data store, the project that we've been working on forever, is now got to the point. Mike's got that to the point where we're actually ready to start transferring our data set onto that. So I'm really pleased that we've got that. I'm not going to run you through all of the names on this slide. We have a board which is elected every year. I'm pleased to say that we got 2 new board members at the AGM 2 weeks ago. Joe Abley, who is returning to the board and has stepped up as treasurer. Shumon Hook, you may remember Shumon has done a stalwart service as a PC chair in the past. The program committee, again, this is the 3rd workshop. They've done a great job this year. Every year we refresh the program committee. Once the board is elected, they make the selection of who next year's program committee is going to be. I hope a lot of the existing program committee will stay on, but if you are interested in serving in the program committee, then please send a nomination to that email address by the 11th of November. We also have a privacy committee. They're doing some work on our data policies, privacy. I'm pleased to say that Peter Lowe from DNS Filter, one of our newest members, has added himself to that committee. The other thing that you should know, in case you weren't aware already, is that the AGM approved an increase to our membership fees. We don't want to really do this, but then nobody wants inflation either. So that's inflation-based, and from the 1st of January, that will be taking effect. You could always renew early if you want to stay at the existing price. So, why should you spend all that money? Why should you become an OARC member? We're here because this is some of the best technical experts in the DNS in the planet. You get to meet them and participate with them. We develop open tools to help not run the DNS, but to measure and monitor and test it. It's a chance to influence the development of these tools. There are lots of DNS data out there. We have a number of data sets which are unique in various aspects, so as a member you get access to that. Every so often something bad happens to the DNS, in which case it's really good to be able to reach the other people who are working on it and get resolution of that. And I think another important thing about OARC is that we're a non-profit, we're a neutral party. We're free of vested interests in the DNS space, and let's face it, there's a lot of vested interests in the internet infrastructure business these days. So we try and stay above that and provide a neutral place for you to gather. But enough from me. Here are a few quotes from some of our members. And as I say, if you're not already a member, I'd be very happy to talk to you about that. Anyway, enough from me. Just want to say a couple of things. Again, a big thank you to RNIDS and SOX as our local hosts here. They've really done a huge amount of work and provided all kinds of things for us. I'd just like to thank them and their teams for doing that. You will find some local materials that they have provided on the registration desk, so please do go and check that out. That's it. I will now hand you over to the session chair for this afternoon, Niels Wiesel. Then you can get on with the actual technical content of the workshop. So thank you all.
Thanks, Geoff. Hi, everyone. I'm Niels. I'm the session chair for today. And the first talk today is by David Lawrence about the UI, the UX, and the registry and registrar landscape. Hi, David. Keith had a clicker. So please keep in mind that we post a survey to the workshops channel about this talk. So please participate in that survey. And also, if you have any questions, please come up to the mic after the talk or post your questions into the workshops channel pre-pended with #questions. All right, David, the floor is yours.
So, hello. Making sure I'm the right distance from the mic. A little bit of feedback. Is that good now? So, yes, as he said, I'm David Lawrence. Many of you know me as Tail, and if you don't know me, well, you may have heard people talking of Tail, and that's me too. I am a software architect at Salesforce. Salesforce is a pretty large company that you may have heard of, and so I'll start covering that in the talk. But I want to talk about all the different experiences I have across a variety of registrars and registries and operators as I am working at Salesforce, and what their user interface is like, what the user experience is like. By and large, things work pretty well. However, I still have a SAD. Okay, so as I mentioned, Salesforce is a large multinational corporation. We are closing in on 75,000 employees, $160 billion worth of valuation, and we're a Fortune 500 company. So that means that in a typical year, we do anywhere from half a dozen to a dozen acquisitions. And most of the companies that we acquire, of course, already have their own DNS in place, both registered domain names and operations. So they can have anywhere from a handful of them to a few hundred of these domains. So the external DNS team is about 10 people strong, and when we're looking for people to work on these transfers, apparently I blinked and didn't step back fast enough. If you actually have ever seen The Jungle Book, you may remember there's a line of elephants and they're looking for volunteers, and all the rest of the elephants step back, and one elephant is left standing out front. That feels a little bit like me. I wanted to use it. I wasn't sure whether an animation would work in this presentation. It turned out an animation wouldn't work, so I'm glad I chose an alternate photo. But if I had Shuman and Pallavi, who I'm sure are listening right now, you would have been labeled as a couple of those elephants stepping back. From experience, they'd done some of these and decided it was not their cup of tea, and I can't fully blame them. In fact, Tim Wazinski, a colleague that many of you may know also, when he saw that I was doing this talk, he sent this to me in Discord. He also has felt that pain, but he ended up taking it over because he sat in on a conversation with the legal team as they were trying to do a transfer, and it was just so extra painful for them that it was pretty clear that somebody in technology had to take over. And so that's the space I work in, trying to facilitate these operations between the legal and the mergers and acquisitions people that need the work done, but all the actual bureaucracy of working through it. It turns out that although it would be super useful for them to do it, Tim claims here that it's highly non-technical work. I think it's a little bit more technical than that remark gives credit for, but yeah, it's true. There's a lot of back and forth that happens. So you'd think it would be easy as pie, though. I mean, you just get a list of the domains, right? We update our ownership to reflect that Salesforce now has the company, and then we move them to our registrar because we like to keep everything in one place, and then we consolidate the operations on. We actually have a couple of different operations platforms, and it should probably take just a couple of hours, right? Nope, it's a dumpster fire. Okay, it's not really rising to the level of dumpster fire, but you would be surprised about the amount of back and forth that this can take sometimes. Before I really get into it, though, I want to point out that this is not a naming and shaming talk. Although you will be seeing screenshots that you could easily use to identify the providers, I tried to blur out the names wherever possible. And the domain names also, I could have put in example.com here and there, but I didn't use that because even though you could sleuth them out, it still would take you an extra step to try and figure out exactly who I'm talking about, because I'm not really trying to shame them. In particular, I'm not trying to shame any of the engineers. If you see one of your own screenshots up here and saying, oh yeah, I did that. Sorry. As you know, I have taken a few of my own arrows for previously working at a company that took a long time to roll out a fix for a DNS protocol problem that we all knew was a big issue, and that didn't roll out as quickly as anybody would have liked. So I know engineers have constraints from their corporations. So, I mean, maybe you're proud of the feature I'm going to point out, but in any event, it's not trying to take shots at you. I will also point out that some of the things that we're seeing I don't think are deliberately dark patterns. This website that you might want to visit to look for some dark patterns and the way different sites use them, deceptive.design, is a very interesting website. But you know, essentially it's all those different things that you kind of hate about when you're using the web, about when something got inadvertently added to your, you know, your web cart, or you had you were subscribed to a mailing list that you didn't intend to subscribe to, and so on. Most of those I don't think are dark patterns. I'm pretty sure a few of them are, though, and I give a little bit of a pass because, as you know, the DNS registrar industry is a pretty low margin industry, so I'm not really surprised that a company would not give you kind of friction-free transfers away from their platforms. The other thing, as I mentioned before, this is going to be a lot of anecdotes. There's no real data here. I haven't done a survey of different operations to say, well, this registrar offers this feature and this registry does things that way. These are just some of the things that I've encountered, so you can get a little sampling of some of the difficulties that are encountered in these operations. So one of the first things, of course, we want to do is just get our ownership updated. We expose all our domain ownership. A lot of our PKI management actually depends on that, and we just want to have the domains reflect the Salesforce ownership right up front. But then one of the things I run into right off the bat is if we want to update the domain ownership to this data, well, ICANN has a 60-day transfer lock that's allowed to be imposed for any change of registration. That's anytime you update the name, organization, or email address. You can end up getting this 60-day lock imposed before you can move out of the registrar you're on. Now, of course, that impacts billing issues for the acquired company and so on. So we prefer to have the registrar transfer happen relatively quickly without having these additional delays that would be imposed by the transfer lock. This screenshot actually comes from a provider who, at least, you know, when you're going to get the transfer lock imposed, they will let you know that you're about to have the transfer lock, and also tell you how long it would be till you can transfer out. That's very nice. The worst case experiences that I have are registrars that would let you change the contact information, not warn you about any possible lock, and then continue to serve you things like transfer codes, implying that they're going to work even though they're going to get them subject to the lock. I will point out that ICANN does allow registrars to offer, it's not a mandatory lock. Registrars can offer you to opt out, but they are not required to offer you to opt out. So by and large, it's really easy to find yourself triggering the lock and having a situation. So here's a company, though, if when we're trying to update, if we did want to update, not worried about the locks, go ahead and update the ownership information right off the bat. You will pretty rapidly run into the situation where you can't do a bulk update. You can't just say for all the, you know, this subset of domains in this account or all the domains in this account, I want to update all the contact information to this. In the worst case, this is a really major provider who makes you fill out separately each type of the contact with information, and it does not allow you, unfortunately, to like fill out one and say like just use the same for the rest of them. And so even trying to use like autofill from your browser, in order to get to this state, I actually had to use autofill like 5 separate times to get kind of this patchwork of things were filled in. And I then also closed a couple of company boxes, because every one of those company boxes, which is just a drop down where you pick company, it was trying to get Salesforce.com filled in. This is in Google Chrome browser, of course. Firefox or Edge might work differently. But you can see, like, some boxes, the organization did get filled in all the way across. Email did, but for some reason the name field didn't. And the second floor, you know, where it says 415 Mission Street, 3rd floor, that should have gone into address 2. But for some reason it went into the other column. This site has improved one thing in that at least if you wanted to tab into the form before and just, you know, enter data across the form, at least now tabs go sequentially through the boxes. When I first had encountered this a couple of years ago, like I would tab from the last name box and it would end up in the email box. And so you couldn't even predict where your tabbing was going to go. But it's still, one downside of that is it still goes down the column. Like it goes down through the full register and contact. So you couldn't like enter the data you needed in a box, copy and paste it over to the rest of the fields easily with keyboard controls. I will note that this site also had a situation where as soon as I changed something that would have changed the ownership, it did mention about ICANN, but not without any hint that this was going to incur a lock. But what's especially frustrating about this is it then also on that propped up this button that said revert ownership changes. So I had cleared out the ownership for a form that we, for a domain that we had there, and then I was just going to revert it all when I was done, and I hit that button, and nothing happened except the box went away. All of the data that I entered in all the fields was still sitting right there. So it's a superfluous button. Fortunately, at the bottom of the form, I just didn't have to commit it. You know, I could cancel at the bottom of the form. But user interface elements that don't actually do what it suggests that they're going to do, those are problematic. You all also noticed that I said earlier that this was a very major provider, so you'd expect a big provider would have an API. And in fact, they do have an API, and I would have been able to iterate over the API. There were 220 domains that I was trying to take care of here. It would have been brilliant if I could have just, updated all the information in a little script that iterated over the API. Turned out there was an undocumented constraint in the API that you could not change the information that we needed to change, presumably because of this ICANN issue. We did end up having a meeting with their customer support, who was able to push through the changes manually on the back end only after being convinced that us doing it for 220 different domains was untenable. And they did take a note. They were like, oh, we'll fix this. But I checked the API just before this talk, and it still is not documented as a constraint. Maybe it's not a constraint anymore, but I bet it still is. I didn't try it again. One of the other funny things about the customer support finally being convinced to go ahead and push through these changes, they did it on a Friday. And every one of their changes needed to be acknowledged positively that, by either the losing address or the gaining address, I don't remember which, but there needed to be positively acknowledged email messages that all went out on a Friday, and by the end of the weekend, there were 36 of them that were no longer able to be validated because they had to be validated within 48 hours. So don't do these things on a Friday. So by and large, because of all these problems with the 60-day transfer lock and wanting to avoid the 60-day transfer lock, and other issues that I've encountered with ownership changes in ways that are confusing, I decided that it's better just let our registrar handle that. They will handle it on the inbound. I'll just get the locks and transfer things to them first. Normally getting codes, the transfer codes, is not quite as easy as this image implies, though. But by and large, at least I don't have to deal with most of the ownership update headaches. Here is actually a really good example of a way that you can get all the codes. This particular site allows you, for a long list of domains, to download either a subset check of them or the entire list. You can get it in a couple of different formats, comma-separated values or XML. And that little checkbox right there will tell you, do you want to include the domain authorization code? So that's brilliant. There's a couple little quibbles I have about the way it's implemented, but overall, this is a relatively low friction way for me to get the transfer code, so I'm pretty happy about it. But one of the things that site does not do is, even though you've downloaded all the transfer codes, it still leaves, if the domains are transfer locked, it still leaves the locks in place. So you have to go back in. Fortunately, it does allow a bulk unlock. Some sites don't. This one does. So it's not that much more friction for it, but it would be nice if it picked up on the fact that you're actually asking for transfer codes, that it should not only unlock its regular level of standard transfer locks, but also its enhanced locking that this particular site preserves, instead of having to go through and do it all again. This image used to say, of course, I think you forgot to unlock your door. One of the other problems I find with getting transfer codes is sometimes the process for it can be a really long, unbelievably long hostile pattern in order to get them. In particular, not allowing you to do it in bulk, and when it does it, you would have to go through each domain in turn, but then have a number of steps just to get through it. So at this particular site, let's count through how many steps it takes, okay? So in this first one, you have to select a domain. Normally, I wouldn't count that as a step against it, except for the fact that you can't do it in bulk. You will see that there is a bulk checkbox, but that bulk checkbox doesn't do anything to help you as far as getting domains unlocked or transfer codes out of them. So I'm going to count that as step one. And next, you come to the domain page, and you have to scroll down for this, so that's number 2, and then you can click on auth code. Fortunately, you don't have to go through the update transfer lock, because it will do that for you when you're unlocking it, so that's actually a nice feature that they do right. So 2 to click that button, that's 2 and 3, the scroll and the click, and now here we are at 4. It tells you this information as a kind of unnecessary interstitial that it could have included in the next box. Because in the next box, it gives you a survey. You have to tell it why you're moving. I shouldn't have to tell you why I'm moving. It's just a thing that I'm doing, but here we are, marketing demands. And so, of course, you have to do 5 in order to click the reason box, 6 to actually select something out of the box, and then 7 to go into the comments box and enter a comment. Fortunately, after the first time I did it, where I actually provided a meaningful comment, I discovered that the requirement that the comments box be filled in was being able to be satisfied by just entering a single character into it. I could put a period and move on. But then we're at 8 because then we have to get to the continue button and activate it. Finally, it pops up a marketing spiel, tries to convince you with this really big box how you should stay, and even offering to contact me. No, I don't want you to contact me. Please don't do that. That's miserable. So another step, I think I'm at 10 now, to just proceed to authorization, and finally I get the code. But of course, to get the code, I actually have to copy it out of the browser and put it someplace else. So I'm going to count that as 11 and 12. So 12 different interface steps that I have to get for every single domain just to get them transferred to our registrar. And what really, really gets me about this screen, you might see that button in the bottom right that says relock. And the relock button is insulting. Like, I didn't go through 12 steps just to relock it. Like, it's like those web forms where you unsubscribe from where you unsubscribe from the mailing list, and yet you're still stuck with them saying, oh, maybe that was an accident. Are you sure you want to resubscribe? But anyway, then a lot of different sites, though, will mail you codes. Mailing codes is a problem. I'm going to have to really speed up to get through a few more. And so I will say, for the sites that mail you transfer codes, it makes sense. I don't really, begrudge them that particular interface choice. However, it can be a problem because a lot of times, you may know that validation codes don't have any hint in them how long they're actually good for. So you get a code, and maybe it was delayed getting to you in 3 days. It might not be any good by the time the code actually got to you. And email formats are terrible. People, they were not made for engineers. You'd think that you could get your codes out of the email. It turns out, if I explain this a little bit more, that even though it looks like we got 10 codes, maybe we could grep them right out of there. A couple of the lines don't actually have the code on them, so it's not line-oriented text. One of the lines is actually duplicated because one of those other files of emails that they used a foreign word, a German word, for what the transfer code was, so you couldn't even identify it with the grep that way. And then you also run into issues where sometimes transferring smart codes through Slack or Messenger or however somebody got you can end up changing your a hyphen to a smart hyphen or a quote into a smart quote. And so you and now have a transfer code that's not going to work when it's actually posted back to the provider. And as I said, these transfer codes, you don't know whether they are going to be valid or not until they actually go through. And so sometimes you waste a lot of time with a code that was never going to work, whether it's because there was still a lock on or whether it was because it expired or so on. A lot of providers do provide something called delegate access. It is really brilliant when you get delegate access. There's a little bit of variability in just how much power it gives you, but I am thankful for the providers that allow that. And I'm already past the time when I thought I'd be at this slide, but one of the things I want to mention is that one of the other things we have to really be on guard for is that a lot of a lot of these domains are hosted at providers that are also providing the operations for the domain, and if you were to transfer the domain away, they can shut down the operations of it, and so we have to coordinate the operations move first. And sometimes getting the zone data out of the the operator side can be really painful. Many of them don't allow downloads of like master file format, some format that you could easily import into your provider. And so I actually have to go in and start screen scraping just to get the data records to set up in our provider. And overall, there are a number of pitfalls that happen with these master file formats that you download, and then when you try to import them, you can end up hitting all kinds of surprising errors. This one at one of our providers is, it imports data asynchronously, and when you import the data, unfortunately, the notification that it failed comes asynchronously, but not in any kind of order that makes sense. You can see I was trying to import clicksoftware.com here, and ended up in a situation where I just could not figure out what was going on with it. One of our other providers, when it failed to import his own, this was for a really crazy reason. It's because there were no NS records at the apex, even though it was going to completely ignore all the NS records at the apex anyway, but the message that it failed to import gave no insight into why it failed to import. So you end up in a lot of these situations where things are just super confusing. You get error messages that don't make any sense. Some of these messages come back from the registry. We had registry update fail once because the SOA TTL on one of our authoritative name servers, I'm just about at the end. I'm being told it's the end, but I'm like 3 slides from the end now. The SOA TTL was lower than the lower bound that the registrar allowed, the registry allowed, but there was absolutely nothing through the registrar or the registry that indicated that's what the problem is. I had to actually involve some of our DNS-OARC colleagues in both those organizations to figure out what the problem was, and we finally got through it, but it took them, even working there, a lot of effort to even figure that out. That same registry was rejecting address updates for a reason that didn't make sense. Yes, it was a CCTLD, but it was an address that was in their local region and in the format expected for that country. So that was still super confusing. And the last organization that I'm going to call out by name, unfortunately, because it was just too classic. For some reason, the Brazilian registry really feels like a Terry Gilliam dystopic nightmare, because just trying to update ownership information, it doesn't use transfer codes. It goes back and forth. They need to see our articles of incorporation. And when we got it to them, well, then they need to see it in Portuguese. And the number of times this went back and forth just for a simple ownership change has just been astounding. And now, since I have extra time, I'm going to talk to you about all the same things that are going on with the RIR. No, I'm not. But a lot of these things actually apply to the RIRs too. I'm going through a situation right now where we're trying to get assets transferred for an acquired company that got dissolved, and now we have to actually reinstantiate the company to get their address space out of RIPE. It's crazy. So I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. My friend Rutger will tell you, except all you people, you probably would believe it. Other people, my M&A people, I don't think understand the pain that I go through for some of these things. And so that's all. Thanks. I'm out of time. Bye. But I will gladly, share a beer with anybody that wants to make my life less painful.
Thank you, David. If you have a question, please post it to the workshops channel or walk up to the... Oh, yeah. Hi, Ray.
Thank you, Dave. Ray Bellis, ISC. So given all these problems, have you considered just becoming an ICANN registrar and cutting them out of the loop?
We actually have considered that. I'll say really briefly. It turns out that our CEO, one of our co-CEOs, really does recognize the value of a good domain name. And this is what part of the problem is. Like when we acquire one of these companies with 200 domains, he basically really wants to hold on to all of them. We have absolutely considered going through the registrar accreditation process also. That might make some of this...
And it's a potential sales opportunity to sell domains to your customers.
Yeah, exactly. Any other questions? Were there any in Mattermost?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Everyone, please also remember to participate in the poll. And if there aren't any further questions...
I'm sorry I had to rush through that. If you do download, I added the slide with the speaker's notes because a lot of these slides don't make sense standing on their own. I totally recognize that. But if you want to see what the original notes for each one were supposed to be, the PDF is uploaded to the event site. So,
great. Thank you, David.
Yep.
Okay, the next talk is by Geoff Huston about the path to Resolverless DNS.
Thanks, Geoff. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Geoff Huston. I'm with APNIC. I am their chief scientist, whatever that means. This afternoon, I'd like to talk to you about stripping out one of the two core parts of what you'd think of the name system for the internet. Because we actually see the DNS as being a space of names and a resolution protocol, a way of taking those names and finding the mapping of those names into the attribute you're after, typically an IP address. That process is resolution, of course. So why am I talking about Resolverless DNS and why is it real? This is the standard view of the DNS system architecture. You know, these days, your machinery, whatever it might have, there's a stub resolver in it that basically asks questions, DNS questions using the DNS protocol. They get fed off to some recursive resolver somewhere whose basic job is to know more than you do and cache the answers that it finds. So if other folk, other stubs, share that recursive resolver, the recursive resolver can then just use the cache and answer it faster. If you didn't know this, you shouldn't be in this room. You know, this is just basic stuff. And what we've found over the years is that most folk don't want to run recursive resolvers. It's a pain. Now, why would you? And so, as usual, the garbage in the DNS gets handed to your local ISP. They're the only folk you ever pay money to. So they go and do this ugly job. So you, the client, sits behind your client wall. You have stub resolvers. They then ask the ISP's recursive resolver that then goes and asks authoritative servers and collects answers. On the whole, this has worked out really badly. Despite all of your efforts, and I know you're professionals, you're doing a pretty crap job. It's as slow as hell. When we're used to instantaneous responses, the DNS can take forever. And the whole interaction with the cache means it might be fast for you and hideously slow for me. Completely unpredictable. This is not something that we actually like in terms of customer level service. What we've also found with engaging experience is that whenever anyone says, I want all the bad content off the internet, the only way to do it is to attack the DNS, because obviously filtering out domain names makes everything better, doesn't it? Yeah, right. And the other thing we've found too, because the only way we've made the internet incredibly cheap is to turn it into a complete surveillance economy. And the best way to understand what you're doing is to look at your DNS queries. If I ever really want to know you more intimately than you know yourself, then all I need to do is look at your DNS queries. Everything is then transparently obvious. And last and not least, there is this whole issue of search and ambiguity. Because NX domain is such a painful answer. I know what you're trying to do, but I'm not going to help you, says the DNS. Whereas the ISP goes, I can make money out of that. Let me take your NX domain response and for a certain amount of money, in this particular case in Australia, from Yahoo, paid Telstra money to say, here's helpful hints on how to get to somewhere that you wanted to go to, but the DNS was unhelpful. I will be helpful instead. Now, oddly enough, it was this that was the first major change in the landscape of DNS resolution. Because who's the loser when that happens? Well, Google. Because Google was doing search, and now you're treading on Google's toes. Oops. The real problem was actually down in the browser land, where they made the one single input box, which used to have search term, URL, single box, let me guess. There was a lot of cross-leakage. As soon as you made it one box, people just typed any old crap in there. And sometimes it was a DNS name, sometimes it wasn't. Sometimes the browser got it right, sometimes it didn't. So all of a sudden, the ISP had an opportunity to monetize and actually send all those crap queries across to a search engine that wasn't Google for money. Google saw the revenue leak. Oops. How do I plug that revenue leak? Well, by making my own open resolver, by actually catching all that stuff and saying, here is a recursive resolver that never, ever, ever lies. And it does DNSSEC validation, it does all the right stuff. And it got a huge amount of following very, very quickly. It rapidly gathered the momentum in the market, particularly in the enterprise sector. But what the open recursive resolvers did was actually fundamentally change that little model of how things work. Because that recursive resolver, when it's open, is behind an internet hop. So that now the stub resolver is actually sending, in the clear, over UDP port 53, your DNS queries to be answered by some open DNS resolver. Now, how many folk do this? A lot. Here's data that's pretty current, up to a couple of weeks ago. And what it suggests is around 65% of users send their queries to their ISP's resolver. Nid fine. But around 17% of users, you can do the maths, around 1 in 6, send their queries to a different resolver that's in the same country. Interesting. That's still an internet hop away. 17% of query users also send their queries to Google across the open internet. And there's a whole bunch of other open DNS resolvers that have a much lower market share. And you can see that as a URL down there. So Google has a massive amount of share of information about what users are doing. And it's an open internet hop over basically open UDP. Bad idea. Really bad idea. I don't need to tell you that, you know that already. So this was not really what we wanted. And so all of a sudden came this effort to let's add massive amounts of query privacy. So if you're going to use an open recursive resolver, go for it. But don't use UDP. Don't use unencrypted UDP. And up came 3 basic approaches. Or it's actually only one, use TLS, but it's the way it gets wrapped up. So there's a straight DNS over TLS, dot. There's DNS over QUIC, which is basically DNS over TLS over an amorphic sort of mix of UDP and TCP and a bit of TLS. Or there's just DNS over HTTPS, which is both HTTPS 2, HTTP 2 or HTTP 3. And these are gathering some momentum. What's the common properties? TLS allows you to authenticate who the other end is. So the standard forms are going, hi, I'm 8.8.8.8, just lying. If you're using TLS, that's a much harder thing to pull off because, you should authenticate who you're talking to. Obviously, it has session encryption, otherwise why would you bother? And if you're going to use HTTP 3 or QUIC, you can actually gang these queries up inside a single encryption session, hideously efficient as UDP, and you don't get head-of-line blocking. So in some ways, HTTP 3 and DOQ are both really good ideas. It's TCP underneath it all. It's a stream protocol. All that whole thing about fragmentation is evil? Yeah, whatever. Avoid it. TCP failover? Yeah, whatever. Not interested. And so particularly in stub to recursive, this stuff is brilliant because it can amortize that initial high cost of establishing the TLS against the whole set of queries that the stub makes to the recursive subsequently. And over time, it's about the same cost to the client as UDP. It's as quick, which is convenient. Here's some data from Cloudflare. APNIC has an agreement with them over their use of 1.1.1.1. 75% of the queries that Cloudflare's resolver system sees come to them over UDP. 19% come over HTTP, DOE. 5% come over DOT. So already, this is making a huge impact in the market, particularly if you look at Cloudflare's data. There's an awful lot of DOE out there. But DOE is not very popular. Here's a slide I stole from Paul Vixie back from 2019, in those halcyon days before the pandemic, where he said that DOE was a political project, not a technical one. And if you really wanted to get out of jail or whatever, go and use a VPN. DOE wasn't really the answer. Very dismissive. I think that's unfair. I actually think there's a lot more to DOE than it looks like on the surface. Because, for one, it sits inside the same port numbers. It's just port 443 traffic. And if you're using QUIC, HTTP 3, it's UDP 443. Much harder to isolate that traffic at the network level. All of a sudden, you've got access to the full set of HTTP application level caching controls. This is brilliant. And of course, because you've got HTTP2 or HTTP3 with persistent connectivity and streaming, you can do reordering, parallelism, priority, all the things you can't do in a single stream TCP session. And I don't even need to tell my platform what I, as an application, am doing. If I'm running on an Apple machine, I don't need to tell Apple everything I'm doing anymore. I'm not using their libraries. I'm not generating logs on their platform. So all of a sudden, I can isolate myself from being spied upon even by my platform. And last and not least, which is the whole point of this, it includes server push. Now, server push is an intrinsic part of HTTP3. There's a bit out of RFC 5470, and what it says is, if I'm a server, I can send you stuff that you didn't ask for, because I think it might be useful. Here's a style sheet. You're going to need it sooner or later. I can push you stuff. If I'm using DOE, I can push you DNS answers before you ask. You don't need to ask. Here is the answer. What about HTTP3? Well, yeah, exactly the same set of text, exactly the same thing about how to do push. So I can send you a web page, and I can send you DNS responses for the DNS names on that web page. And all of a sudden, you don't have to resolve them. So it's incredibly fast. There is no delay for name resolution. And it's incredibly private, because you aren't asking. The server asked. The server doesn't know in advance who the client is, and the end user is not actually making those queries. So all of a sudden, you're not visible anymore inside the DNS. So think of a Google search page answer. Think if every single name on that page was actually a pushed DOH object. All of a sudden, one click takes you to that resource. No DNS resolution phase whatsoever. It's fast. Now, there's one problem in all of this, and that is, how do you know it's true? It's any old server. It could be pushing you crap. So you really should be using DNSSEC, and you really should be validating those answers. Or maybe not. Because if I can push you the answer, I can push you the DNSSEC validation chain at the same time. Go and have a look at RFC 7901. So all of a sudden now I can send you, here's the resolution of that name, and here's the reason why you can trust it. Because all of a sudden with DNSSEC, it doesn't matter how you learned it. It matters that you can validate it. And it doesn't matter if my recursive resolver can validate it. That's irrelevant. Trust is me. I should be able to validate it. And oddly enough, if you do it this way, you can actually get the stub resolver doing, or the stub application, sorry, doing the validation directly. It's authentic, it's current, it's complete. Now, it doesn't matter how it learned it if it validates, because it's true. And that gives the assurance that data is usable. What if the push data isn't signed? You shouldn't be pushing it. If you can't tell whether it's true or not, there's no reason why you should believe a server. Just discard it. Because server push only really works when the data is signed and you're pushing the validation data across with the actual answer itself. Because otherwise, all trust models are broken. So what can we say about this that gets interesting? In the last 10 years, you've actually seen most of the internet retreat into applications. That's the only place where there's money. No one cares about infrastructure. No one cares about transmission. No one cares much about protocols. All of a sudden now, it's the only application space that actually gathers up the investment. And so now HTTP-based applications rule the internet, and they rule the resultant experience for users. So all of a sudden, Resolverless DNS plays directly into that card. Applications have control over how clients can learn information, have control over how clients can trust that information, and have control over the entire process of name resolution. I'm pushing you the answers as you need them. So there's no more reliance on UDP-based timers, variable timing controls, the whole issue with fragmentation, TCP. Everything that OARC has talked about in the last 10 years doesn't need to happen. This is a way around it directly. It gives you a secured connection with authenticated server that does the original ferreting of information on your behalf. And it doesn't leak metadata. It just doesn't. As long as the DNS data is DNSSEC signed. If it's not signed, you lose. There's no point pushing it because it's crap anyway. So where's this heading? There's a new economics of the internet. And it's not just about cloud and CDNs, although that has a lot to do with it. It has this whole issue that the internet is now a completely different thing than what it used to be. This is not a network that pushes packets around. This is a system that delivers content at the application and service level. And that is funded by advertising revenue. And the loser is the common infrastructure. The loser is transmission. The loser is routing. And oddly enough, the loser is the DNS as we knew it as a resolution system. That's all commodity. No one cares, no one invests. There is no incentive to make it better. The only incentive is to bypass it. And oddly enough, it's the application and service level that's trying to perform that. The infrastructure is under constant pressure to get cheaper, and the DNS is being caught up in that. You can't innovate in the DNS anymore. No one is willing to fund you to do it because there's no money. So does Resolverless DNS have a chance in that kind of environment? It looks pretty bleak, and in particular because it assumes that DNSSEC is actually out there, and that's a tough assumption. The statistics on how many zones are signed is, disappointingly small. 10% if you're feeling optimistic, and probably a bit lower. And because few zones are signed...
Recording in progress.
Great. The whole thing about large DNSSEC responses has put everyone off, but they are UDP-based issues. Once you move on to a system that's actually using stream-based protocols, DOH, this is no longer relevant. And also the whole issue is no one validates because it takes time, and this stresses out UDP DNS. Yes and no, it's the gathering of the validation information that takes time, not the crypto itself. So inside this, and particularly with chained extensions, where the server gives you the reason why you should trust the data, you can answer most of these problems that we see today with the low uptake of DNSSEC. So why is this interesting? We've spent the last 10 years trying to shave a couple of milliseconds off retrieving URLs. We really have. And yet we've done nothing, zip, nada, about the incredible waste of time we spend doing DNS resolution. It is a massive time penalty. It's a huge privacy leak and a continuous source of failure, otherwise you wouldn't be here. In other words, of all of the areas of infrastructure that we know the least about, the DNS is startlingly the main attractor here. It's just not working. Now, Resolverless DNS won't fix all of this at once, but oddly enough, it'll hand control of the process of name resolution back into the application in service environment, to the Salesforces of this world, that actually have a whole lot more money than the rest of us, that actually are willing to spend that money and innovate, and it makes it a whole lot faster. And it hides the DNS and the client from the underlying infrastructure. It becomes, if you will, an asset at the application level. And for that reason, it's one of those interesting steps that aligns with the entire process of the way the architecture of the DNS is changing. It's changing into an application level environment where the rest of the infrastructure is a valueless desert. So that's basically what I've been saying. We're deploying CDNs for a reason. And the reason is we want a bigger, faster, more scalable internet. And the only way we can do that is to actually shift content and service up into the application level. We've been working like crazy for non-blocking protocols like QUIC to exploit parallelism, and tuning TCP and network behaviors like crazy to make them go faster. And we've been trying to make the DNS richer in terms of the information, look at the SVCB records, etc., but we haven't actually done an awful lot to make the DNS faster. But the innovation is at the application level, not at the DNS and infrastructure level. And the whole issue about Resolverless DNS is that it plays directly into that process. By making the entire issue of resolving a DNS name the responsibility of the server who is sending you references to those named elements, rather than the responsibility of the user to go chase afterwards, becomes a really interesting step in both performance and economics. And I think that's time to about the minute or so. Thank you. So if there are any questions, I will happily try and evade them. Thank you.
Thank you, Geoff. So the workshop channel has questions. The first one would be, why would anyone want to run their own resolver, but why would anyone want to use for free a resolver managed by someone else?
Once you DNS-SEC sign data, it doesn't matter if you pick it up in the gutter. It doesn't matter. If you can validate it, it's current, it's complete, and it's usable. If it's not signed, put it back in the gutter. But if it is signed, it doesn't matter how you learned it. And that's the point.
Thanks. Shane?
Hello? Good. I'm Shane Kerr from NS1. So I wanted to ask a little bit more about one thing you mentioned about unsigned data, about how it doesn't fit in this model, it's untrustworthy. It doesn't really change the trustedness of unsigned data, right? It just gets it from a different source, which is equally untrustworthy, so.
You know, I always think sending people rancid, unsigned data is just unsafe. And whether it's using a DNS resolver or using server push, it's the same issue. It's just unsafe. Because you actually don't know. And all of you out there thinking, I asked 1.2.3.4 about this question, therefore the answer is good, are executing a leap of faith that I would say is baseless, naively stupid to the nth degree, and just wrong. And what you're trusting to get you out of the heinous sin you just created is that the web PKI will haul you out of the hell you've just landed in. And if you think the web PKI works flawlessly all the time, you've been either dead or asleep for the last decade. It's horrible. So if you can't trust DNS data, no matter how you learned it, and you shouldn't, unless it's signed, there's no saving you. So should I pass rancid unsigned data in push? No, I shouldn't be doing that anyway. It's a disservice.
I guess the reason I think it's important to consider a little more carefully is because so little of the internet is signed as far as the DNS world is concerned, that I think you would be limiting the applicability of this technology if you didn't do it.
I think it's not signed because of this bad rep that DNS-SEC has when it's combined with UDP. And quite frankly, yes, that's true. UDP has struggles with big signatures. It struggles with the time delay. It struggles with resolution of the validation chain. If I can deliver you the entire validation chain as part of the answer in push, you haven't got a problem. You haven't got a problem in speed, resiliency, or reliability. So I would hope, maybe I'm just naively optimistic, that this would actually make DNS-SEC viable, whereas today, I wouldn't advise my best mate to sign. I might, it just doesn't work very well.
Okay. Hazel would like to know, does DNS server push change the threat model? Should zones have to opt into this? Or perhaps there should be a cap on RRSIG validity length for this? Because otherwise, now that being on path isn't necessary, bad actors could combine, for example, old signed records with a BGP hijacking attack or divert the clients.
It has all the vulnerabilities of DNS-SEC itself has with injecting bad information, and I am not the world's best expert on trying to figure out of injection of old data in DNS-SEC, timing of signatures, etc. But what you are relying on is the signature and timing chains in those RRSIGs to actually give you an indication of the authenticity, completeness and currency of the data. It's no better, no worse than DNS-SEC validation is today. I don't think it alters the security threat model.
Benno?
Thank you. Benno Overeiner, and Nanda Labs. So you gave a technical presentation, but and I don't expect a long answer here, but do you also think of or consider policy and governance implications, like we have seen with DO, as a technology it's being used, but the kind of the policy and governance discussion influenced the way it was deployed. So there's more discoverability in the neighborhood that browsers prefer the ISP DO server, don't fall back to, or don't use the default. And as you mentioned previously also, it's not only about web service, but you see a trend that applications do the DNS and not the system is providing the DNS service. So it's and maybe a short answer is fine because it can suck up all the air, this kind of discussion.
There is a massive commercial and public interest from governments in looking at the DNS for a profession.
Yeah.
Many users regard that as overly intrusive to be kind. It does not seem useful or valuable in the long term to have the DNS fatally corrupted in such a manner. And any measure that brings a better occlusion into yours and my behaviours, knowingly that our work online is as private as we wish it to be, not someone else determines, is, I think, in the interests of you and I as users.
Yeah.
As soon as you corrupt a common communication system, it's useless in the long run. If all my letters, to use an old analogy, get opened by the censor, I'm not going to write you a letter with any meaningful content. Same thing's happening on the internet. And this is why, in some ways, I think this is a necessary step for the industry to actually understand that privacy of users is a critical point of why we have and use this internet. Is that a short answer or a long one?
All right, let's try to keep it as short as possible. The workshop channel would like to know, if you already authenticated the server you're talking to, why you still need to authenticate any push data?
Because I can authenticate you, but you can still tell me crap. It's still you, thank you. I know it's you, but it's still crap. It's the content that matters, not the channel.
Okay, Ralph?
Ralph Akamai. So you're taking a huge bet on DNSSEC, and that's something I personally like. Someone in the end still has to resolve this data because we're not going to change the authorities out there. So, and we still have work to do in the DNS to get this probably a bit better. So what's your, would that be discounted?
There are two answers to this. One is the server pushing the content needs to resolve the DNS names that it's serving. Certainly. But at the same point, if it's a large enough server farm, or Amazon or Cloudflare, they can actually get a feed of authoritative data from authoritative servers and not resolve at all, but simply get the zone files, get the feed. Once you get into highly scaled systems, the DNS as an on-demand query protocol tends to have less and less use. And if I was the minion inside some mythical cloud company that had a whole lot of servers serving push data, I might go to the major authoritative servers saying, give me a feed and I won't bug you with DNS queries. So all of a sudden it actually allows different ways of assembling this data. It doesn't have to be the DNS everywhere.
But there is no standardized way there, and it's kind of like a concentration of the... Pardon?
Get working. Do it.
Okay.
Brett, please keep it short.
Yeah. Thanks, Geoff. Brett Carr-Nominate. So I'm going back to your answer you gave to Shane, and I think you're right. In traditional DNS, we're getting lots of non-signed answers back, and we're trusting them. But I don't think that means we should necessarily trust unsigned answers from push. I think, to paraphrase a British Prime Minister, I think we need to get DNSSEC done.
Right, but my point is, don't push crap. Start where you mean to finish. Once you let, whatever it is, the elephants get its nose through the door and start pushing crap, you're never going to turn it off. And I think users who are going, if I'm push data, I expect the validation chain to be there, and it's my responsibility as a client to validate, is an excellent step forward. Sure, if you're not giving me that pushed answer, I'll go and use DNS resolution, and I may or may not choose to trust it because it may or may not be a lie. Yeah. But if I'm getting pushed, I actually want the reason why I should trust it, because the server is just some random server, really. So that's why I would say start as you mean to go on.
Right. One sentence question, please.
Raffaele Sumesi, University of Twente. What if you push outdated data?
What if I push outdated data? Keep your RR SIGs and your timings in DNSSEC up to date. Don't make centuries, long signatures if you want to avoid outdated data. As with all crypto, lifetimes are essential. That's the shortest answer as I can get.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geoff.
Thank you.
Everyone, please make sure you participate in the poll, and if you have a +1 for tonight's social event, please remember to pick up the badge in the break now. We take a break until 15:35. Where is my